A reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call him while he is near. Let the scoundrel forsake his way, and the wicked his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord for mercy, to our God who is generous in forgiving. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians. Brothers and sisters, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me life is Christ, and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. And I do not know which I shall choose. I am caught between the two. I long to depart this life and be with Christ, for that is far better. Yet that I remain in the flesh is more necessary for your benefits. Only conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told the disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into the vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace. He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. He went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out at about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started at about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowners, saying, "These last ones worked only for 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us. We bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? The last will be first, and the first will be last." The Gospel of the Lord. Okay, 2 categories in today's Church Jeopardy. The first is biblical calamities. Biblical calamities. What's the first homicide recorded in the Bible? You are good. Off to a rollicking good start. Okay, you got that, the $100 question. Good, good, good. So, who killed whom? Which brother was it? Cain killed Abel. Abel wasn't able, he was unable to defend himself. That's how we remembered that one. And why did Cain kill Abel? Yeah, there's an E word that comes into the picture there. What's the E word that comes into what Cain was feeling about Abel and Abel's relationship with God? He was envious, right? So we find this homicide rooted in envy, and the antidote to that envy clearly would be gratitude. If only Cain could have been grateful for his relationship with God, he wouldn't have had to go and kill his brother. Okay, first one, Cain and Abel, first disastrous homicide. Next one. Who was the guy who went up the mountain and it got all smoky up at the top of the mountain, and the guy at the top of the mountain was talking to God, and the people down below started to say, well, why is it that he gets to talk to God and we don't? Who was the guy at the top of the mountain? Moses. And the people at the bottom of the mountain were stricken by a couple of different afflictions: self-doubt, doubt about the community, but also they were struck with the E word, which is envy, because they envied Moses' relationship with God, and they wanted some of that for themselves. And once again, the antidote to envy could have been gratitude. Man, if the people could just have accepted that truth of God's special relationship with Moses and tried to envy it rather than destroy it, we would have been a lot better off. Next biblical calamity. Who's the guy with the Technicolor dream coat? Joseph. And who is it that ended up not being so nice to him? His brothers. And they threw him in the pit, and they sold him to a group. What was the name of the group to whom they sold him? That's like Final Jeopardy. Who was the group that the group of traveling, this group that bought Joseph and took him down to Egypt? Ishmaelites, you get it. Okay, good. And Andrea and Tim, they did not know ahead of time, okay? I promise you. And what was the problem that the brothers had with Joseph? What was the E word that crept into their relationship? Envy, right? Because Jacob had made this beautiful coat for Joseph, and they were just walking around in regular old street schmata, as they say, the rags. Too bad for them. That's the biblical trivia. What's the K word? This is TV trivia. What's the one thing that can kill Superman? What is it? Kryptonite. Kryptonite. Now, this is America. How is it that more people knew about kryptonite than knew about the Ishmaelites, huh? We got to go back to Bible school, I'll tell you, one more time. In each one of those cases, just like Superman can't be around kryptonite, you can't occupy the same room. If you're having Superman over, do not have kryptonite for dinner, huh? You can't have those two things. They exclude one another. Either you get Superman or you get the kryptonite. You don't get both. Same thing in all of those lessons about you either get to be envious or you get to be grateful, but you can't do both. And that deeper sense of gratitude is, in fact, the kryptonite for envy, right? And unlike Superman, envy is something we want to dismiss, we want to discard. Deeper gratitude drives out envy. And as we wonder about how it is that the Lord is asking us to love the tough customers, those people, when you're around people who are full of envy, oh my gosh, you can't get out of there soon enough. But we're still called to love them. And we've, each one of us, been that person who was consumed with envy, so we can be patient. The first reading today from Isaiah is all about the people who become envious, and the answer to becoming envious is to become more grateful. Today's first reading comes from the 55th chapter of Isaiah. It's the home stretch of Isaiah. It's the part where the good news is starting to pour forth. Now this week, and it's in the first 3 lines, there's a reference to wickedness, the people's wickedness, and some translations treat it differently, but it's that wickedness that requires mercy. Now think back to Ezekiel last week referring to the people's wickedness, and he had a very specific sort of wickedness in mind. Do you remember what it was? He says, when you're wicked, God really does get not too happy about that. And that wickedness was the worship of false gods, right? And so when we hear it from Ezekiel, from Isaiah, from Jeremiah, from Daniel, typically, when they refer to the wickedness, it's the wickedness of worshiping false gods. That is, non-existent small g gods, cult figures, Astarte, Baal, the Isis gods. These small g gods whom people believed in around in the ancient Near East. And the history of Israel is that when they looked around and saw these communities that worshiped these non-existent small g gods, they envied what they thought those small g gods were doing for the people, and they let their envy carry them away to worship of those false gods. It never worked. Envying other people's relationships with God, whether it's the real God or a fake small g God, never leads us to some place where we want to be. And for them, it led them off to captivity, it led them to sorrow and to heartache, because for every time they ended up trying to envy those people and worship their God, things went completely south for the children of Israel. Moses had the original antidote. It happened first when he came down the mountain, and there they were worshiping the golden calf, another false god, small g, non-existent. And his point was, when you get tempted to do that, to envy those people so much that you want what you think they have, remember what the Lord your God has done for you, how he brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Remember how horse and chariot he has thrown into the sea. Remember, this is before they had Superman, that when it comes to envy, which will destroy you, gratitude is the kryptonite. So when you're tempted to be envious, remember what the Lord your God has done for you, and make it personal. Make it like the Blessed Mother would do a few thousand years later. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. And then she goes on to identify all those things the Almighty has done for her. That story about envy, and it's just such a self-destructive thing, and we choose it. It's one of the devil's favorite tools. Because it drives us away, as St. Ignatius says, it deprives us of peace and prevents our spiritual progress. So in the story today, now it's really tough to be an economics guy and not really question today's gospel. Just a momentary digression. I'm just going to go off to the economics of about 45 minutes or so. Those of you who remember Economics 101, what happened today is completely unfair, because people should be paid according to, remember that old phrase, the marginal revenue product of labor? Okay, a couple of you are nodding your heads. Most of you are grimacing. Let me put that down and get back to the regularly scheduled topic here. From an economics perspective, it's completely out of whack, but from a spiritual perspective, it's not. It's the harvest time. The landowner needs extra workers. It's the same today as it was then. Typically, you get people passing through the land who aren't part of the regular workforce, which is not enough to bring in the harvest. And so the landowner goes out and hires immigrant workers, and they gather in a certain place, just like it happens at the Wawas today. Same deal, biblical roots. But then the people who are brought in at at 6 o'clock in the morning are going to be paid the same. It's a denarius. The typical workday at the harvest would be 10 hours. You start an hour after sunrise. You stop an hour before sunset, so you work from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. 10 hours, so your hourly rate is 1/10 of a denarius per hour. And then the landowner goes out and gets some more people, and they work for 1 hour, and their hourly wage is a denarius per hour. So the early arrivers are getting 1/10 of a denarius per hour. The late arrivers are getting a full denarius per hour. So let's say that if you work at a sub shop around here and you get an okay deal, you're going to get $10 per hour. How would you feel about it if somebody came in, you're getting $10 an hour, they come in, they get $100 an hour? How happy are you going to be, right? Absolutely, it makes total sense. Why am I not getting what they have? And then we get the mirror that only reflects envy, and we see, that mirror is all green today, huh? But we come green with envy, and maybe it's not fair, but the Lord is saying, you know what? It has everything to do with the rewards of discipleship. Some people would say, Peter, James, and John were the first disciples. Do they get a better relationship with Christ and a better seat in heaven than Paul and Barnabas, who came later? The answer is no. The children of Israel were the first to come into relationship with Jesus Christ. Should they get a better deal in this life in terms of the serenity of relationship with Christ and a better seat in heaven because they've been in the game longer than, say, the people in Spain or the people in the Americas or the people in Asia? The answer is no. It doesn't make any difference when you came into relationship with Christ. Everybody gets all the goods. Everybody gets the same reward. And sometimes there was a time in the early church, remember Matthew in the 20th chapter is especially addressing the challenges of the early church, and clearly some people were envious that they should receive more than the latecomers to the church. And Jesus is saying, why would you possibly be envious? Aren't you grateful for all the gifts you've received in this life and for the gifts you'll receive in the next life? Let the gratitude be the kryptonite for that destructive syndrome of envy. Come on, pull out the kryptonite. You have it. The kryptonite is a deeper sense of gratitude, to stop and smell the roses, to stop and count the flounders or the flowers, whatever you want to count, right? Now, we all have our pasts. Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. And there have been moments probably when we could envy, and in our day, given our quality of life and our living standards, it's not going to be so much about what other people have materially, although that is an issue, but it's more of an issue of what other people have in terms of relationship, just like it was for Moses, like it was for Joseph and his brothers, like it was for Cain and Abel. We envy other people's relationships. We envy other things, but we envy their relationships. And if it's a tough time in our family, I'm going to envy. We had these cousins. In fact, the uncle just died about 2 weeks ago, and I was reading his obituary in a paper. And I thought, we used to refer to them as the perfect cousins. 4 kids, everyone perfect, white, straight teeth. 4 brothers. That's all they had. Every one of them, 3-letter men at these fancy prep schools, and every one of them got into Ivy League colleges. We hated them. I'm only kidding. We just thought, no, but the cousins used to refer to them, oh, have you seen the perfect cousins lately? What they had, we didn't envy, believe me, because they had what they had. But it's the relationships that we envy, and if we're having a tough time in our family, whatever we define as our family, and someone else is looking like it's all sunshine and roses, we're going to envy that, and the envy takes us to dark places where Satan really wants us to go. Some of those relationships, not only family relationships, but professional relationships. This guy has the boss's ear. That gal really seems to be sitting in the corner office. How come she has the access to the board and I don't? Nothing good comes of that. Noble ambitions are a separate thing. They're beautiful. Inspired aspirations, wonderful thing. Envy, different animal. So 2 questions. When have you felt that trap of envy, whether it's when you were in school, you envied someone else's athletic abilities, their academic talents, their relationships, whatever else it was, and what got you out of that? Now, to ask you, when you look at your own life, to notice what liberated you from envy, notice the role of gratitude. It's in there someplace. You became grateful for what you were and what you had and the goods in your life. What's your story on escaping envy? And who's someone in your life right now, someone about whom you care, but it's a tough call, man, because they're all about envy for whatever reason. They're dissatisfied with their position in life. They're constantly squawking about wanting what someone else has. It's a drag to be around them. But Jesus is asking you to love them. And if we can help to cultivate, not by giving lectures or 12-minute sermons, but by giving them an example of gratitude and affirming what's beautiful in their life and pointing out the things for which they can be grateful. We've all been there. Let's admit it. And by owning that sin in our own lives, we become much more effective apostles to help lead other people to the peace that the dark side doesn't want them to have.
And so we escape the traps of Cain and Joseph's brothers and Moses' grumblers. And we stumble ahead rejoicing. Where has it been your story? Who's an envious person that's a drag to be around? But you know you have to love them. And to cultivate that sense of gratitude is the best possible response. It is kryptonite. So it's about envy, that very destructive thing. Satan's done a lot of damage in the world by stirring up our sense of envy, right? And the antidote is truly gratitude, to stop, and it's an act of will sometimes to be attentive to and grateful for the great things the Almighty One has done for me. And so we look at our own history of envy, and we realize, okay, right, it was a bad place. It wasn't a place of light, happiness, and peace. It was just the opposite. And we notice how we escaped it, how we escaped Satan's grasp in that envy trap. And although envious people, glass half empty people, resentful people, they're tough to be around. You don't want to take them on vacation, but you got to love them. And so the Lord is reminding us, cultivating that sense of gratitude, helping them do that. Okay, that's an act of love. It truly is. And not with big speeches, just with example and ordinary reminders of how good things are. What's your story of envy and liberation? Who needs your help? Let us pray.